Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 19th of June 2021. The articles which we shall take up today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion. Cold Peace is a column appearing on page number 6, and what led to Biden-Putin summit appears on page number 13. And both of them focus on Joe Biden meeting Vladimir Putin in Geneva on January 16, which is day before yesterday. Now look at this picture. This might seem like very normal and a formal meet between two heads of the state of a very two important nations, United States of America and Russia. But there is a history behind this picture as well. Mr. Biden in the past has called Mr. Putin a killer. And we know how relations have hit the lowest point in recent years since the end of the Cold War. Now, a normal aspirant would think, why is it important for me to understand the chemistry and how the relationship between Russia and US is evolving with time? Now, if you just focus on the GS Paper 2 International Relations syllabus, you will see effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries in India's interests. Now, US is of course developed, and Russia is, if not very developed, is still far ahead of India, especially in terms of technology. And how US and Russia behave with each other is quite relevant for India. US, after all, is the biggest destination of our service exports and also the second largest source of remittances. A significant amount of diaspora lives here, and so that is why US is very important. Also, we both are democratic countries, and so there is quite a convergence between the interests of India and US, especially keeping in power Chinese aggression in South Asian region. Whereas if we talk about Russia, our traditional ally, the biggest arm exporter to our country, and just look how India's relation with Russia have changed because US relation with Russia had changed. US imposed sanctions on Russia, which impacted India, because of which a lot of important exports, for example S-400 missile exports, have been delayed, and there are various other factors as well. And so that is why it is very important to understand what has led to the souring of relations between US and Russia in past 20 years. And now, what is the reason behind this handshake? What is the reason behind the meeting, and such a cordial meeting between President of USA and Russia? And so in this discussion, we are exactly going to do the same. We will trace the relationship from 1990 and we'll divide them into two parts. 1990 to 2012 and 2012 to 2021, when the actual deterioration in the relationship took place because of Putin granting asylum to Snowden, annexation of Crimea, Syrian civil war, Russian interference in US elections, and deepening relationship between Russia and China. And then finally, we will look into what is causing the recent shift in both US and Russia policies. Let us now begin the discussion. So the United States relationship with Russia is today the worst that it has ever been since 1985. We know how last US President Mr. Trump came into office determined to improve ties with Russia. But what we are seeing in last 1 to 2 years is more and more sanctions being levied by American executives against Russian companies and Russian firms. Then in the last 6 months, we have seen how both of them have expelled each other's diplomats. Not just that, the United States national security strategy declares Russia and China the two top threats to US national security. At the best of times, US and Russia ties are a mixture of cooperation and competition. But today, they are largely quite adversarial to each other. And it has not always been like that, especially since the breakup of USSR. Because after the USSR collapsed, many in the United States assumed that once the Russian had thrown off the shackles of Soviet communism, they would want to join the West and become more like Americans and Europeans, mainly what we call as Global West. After the breakup of USSR, the American government sent political and economic advisors to work with officials and people in the very new private sector in Russia to promote democracy and market. Now, during the time when these advisors worked in Russia, There was a lot of chaos. After all, Russia had just ended a very long communist regime. And so this period saw a lot of chaos, few people getting very rich very quickly, and most of the people were getting poor. Along with that, most of the populace and general perception of the public was that Russia's genuine interests were ignored by the West. And so, as a country, Russia felt quite humiliated because it was felt that Russia's genuine interests were ignored. And this also includes Russia's right to a sphere of influence in the post-Soviet states, meaning that they should not aspire to join NATO or the European Union. But it was increasingly being felt by Russia that America was conspiring with other Western European nations to force more and more breakaway states from USSR to join these organizations, which obviously created a threat perception in Russia. At the same time, you have arrival of a man which cannot be removed from office, Mr. Putin, who not only centralized the overall administration in Russia but also has become increasingly authoritarian, under which Russia has come to define its security perimeter not as the borders of Russian Federation but as the borders of former Soviet Union. You talk to any of the former states of USSR, you are creating a threat for Mr. Putin. And so not only Russia has become increasingly authoritarian, but its global aspirations have increased a lot in past 20 years. Now in the same 20-25 years, there have been two periods when they have cooperated with each other, meaning US and Russia. The immediate post 9/11 period, when Russia assisted the United States in first phase of the war in Afghanistan, providing information which it had collected from its decade-long war over there. We know USSR was there in Afghanistan and how it became the last war of USSR, and so they had a lot of information and intelligence related to local people and how they operate, and Russia actively provided that to US. And the second is the cooperation as far as arms control is concerned, especially during 2008 and 12 period between President Barack Obama and Dmitry Medvedev, when Moscow and Washington cooperated on arms control, along with cooperation continuing on Afghanistan and Iran. And let us now go over to the incidents of last 10 years which have taken place, which have actually deteriorated and soured the relationship between US and Russia, creating problems not just for India but also for many other countries. And so for the first time, drastic deterioration between the US-Russia relation came in 2012. When Putin returned to Kremlin in 2012, there were a lot of protests against him, against the way elections were conducted. And Putin started believing that the United States, especially Foreign Secretary or United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, was behind the demonstrator who was funding and fueling the protest in Russia. As a retaliation, the very next year in 2013, Russian state headed by Putin granted political asylum to Mr. Edward Snowden, the NSA contractor who stole millions of classified documents and fled to Russia via Hong Kong. If you don't know about him, he is a former computer intelligence consultant who leaked highly classified information from the National Security Agency in 2013 when he was an employee and subcontractor of CIA. And his disclosures revealed numerous global surveillance programs, many quite actively run by NSA in cooperation with various other Western countries, and it was a big setback for American agencies. And since then, US and other global agencies want to arrest him, but he is quite safe in Russia. The then president of US, Mr. Obama, directly requested Russian government to return him, but to no avail, and finally Obama cancelled a planned summit with Putin. And so that was the second big instance of deterioration in relationship. And then, following months of popular protests, the pro-Russian Ukrainian president fled to Russia and was replaced by pro-Western government. Shortly thereafter, Russian troops moved in to occupy and annex Crimean Peninsula, which had been a part of Ukraine since 1954, thereby violating the terms of 1994 Budapest Memorandum, in which Russia, US, Ukraine and UK had pledged to uphold Ukraine's territorial integrity. And during the next few months, Russian-backed separatists and Russian troops wearing no dress moved in to occupy the parts of Donbas region in southeastern Ukraine, ousting the legitimate local authorities. Since then, Russia and Ukraine have been fighting a very bloody war in the region in which around 14,000 people have died so far. Responding to this violation of sovereignty, US imposed sanctions on Russia and Russian individuals which are very close to Mr. Putin. After the annexation of Crimea, we had Syrian civil war. And in the Syrian civil war, American side wants to remove the President Bashar al-Assad, and Russians have supported him since then. And now we know what is the outcome. He is still the president of Syria. And Russia's entry into Syrian civil war in 2015 to support the president has also created a lot of tensions. Since then, Washington and Moscow have had to deconflict their air operations in Syria to prevent unanticipated collisions. Since last few years, there have been a lot of protests against the sitting president, Mr. Maduro, which is quite disliked by United States because of his history with communist parties. And so the American government supports the opposition leader who has been continuing with his protests in Venezuela. But Russia has been actively supporting the current regime and has been quite successful as well. And this is a problem because Venezuela lies in South American continent quite close to US, and Russia still has a lot of influence over there, which quite angers US. Then the decisive and a major blow to US-Russia relation was Russia's cyber interference in 2016 US presidential election campaigns. Russia at the same time also tried to penetrate election machines in some states, raising the possibility that it could seek to change the outcome of future elections. And in past 10 years, there have been very good relations between Russia and China. Not only their ties are deepening in sense of economics or economic relations, but also in the terms of their convergence as far as they view the globe together. And now this is a problem. This is a problem because now Mr. Biden has to handle two adversaries at the same time, Russia and China. And the stance of Mr. Biden is now appearing to change because of his strategic thinking, because now he thinks that China is a much bigger and a difficult adversary to handle as compared to Russia. Because after all, Russia might have some geopolitical power, but it is not an economic powerhouse. It does not have financial assets. Whereas if you take into account China, it is the manufacturing hub of the world. It is funding massive infrastructural projects across Asia and Africa. More and more countries of Europe are increasingly moving in its pocket. And so, the main reason behind the change in American stance under new President Mr. Joe Biden is the changing American priorities. And that change in priority was indicated when in March, Mr. Biden called first summit of Quad countries, which includes US, India, Japan and Australia, which decided to boost vaccine production to help other countries. Then at home, the US Congress passed $250 billion tech and manufacturing bill, which would ensure funds for semiconductor research, design and manufacturing. And let's admit it, all of these aspects in which China is current leader, whether your mobile is from Apple or from Oppo, all of it is being manufactured, including the chips, in China. And it is the lead in electronic manufacturing and design which is providing the crucial edge to China in technological world. And so Mr. Biden realizes that now when he's gearing up to focus on China, Russia is quite a distraction, and so you cannot handle two geostrategic rivals or adversaries at the same time, and so you will have to mend ties with one of them. Apart from that, you should realize that America and Russia were the first two countries to come up with quite effective vaccines against COVID-19. Then with advances in technologies, as national governments and international institutions explore different approaches to Arctic region, there needs to be coherence, or there needs to be an agreement on Arctic governance on which both US and Russia have to collaborate actively, because these are the only two major players over there. And then what it appears to most of the political thinkers, that now both America as well as Russia are actively thinking to dismantle more and more number of weapons. At the same time, sanctions against Russia have impacted Russia's economy quite adversely. And so for Russia also, improving ties with US is not such a bad proposition. Delhi-Ghaziabad-Meerut RRTS to go for contactless ticketing appears on page number 3, which is a regional news. And now, since there is a dearth of important articles today, what we can do is that we can weave a complete discussion around a very important line in the syllabus under GS Paper 1. We know under GS Paper 1, the syllabus is arranged as history, Indian society, and then finally geography. And under Indian society portion, you have a topic, urbanization, their problems and their remedies. Now, urbanization is a phenomena which is rapidly changing the face and structure of Indian society, and it is a very wide topic in itself. But since this article deals with the transport system, we are going to focus ourselves on challenges of transport in urban areas, which is a very important topic for UPSC. There are 3-4 major schemes, flagship schemes to solve the problems of urban transport in mega cities in our country. And from the perspective of mains examination, you first need to understand the cause of urbanization and how massive urbanization creates problems for transport and how it is reflected in the changes it brings in the Indian society. And then we will move on and understand the causes behind the poor state of transport or urban transport in India's big cities. And then finally, like all the discussions, we'll go through the solutions as well. And so let us now begin the discussion. And so we are going to first understand what is the cause of massive urbanization which is leading to massive congestion? What are the major impacts of this massive congestion, mainly in terms of society and economy? Then we will understand the causes of these traffic jams or the poor state of urban transport. And then finally, we will understand the solutions which should be followed by various state and central government in order to solve this problem. So we know that urbanization has been one of the most dominant economic and social changes of 20th century, and especially it is true of developing world. Although urbanization has been there since the existence of human society, there have been massive cities even during ancient times, not just in India but across the world. And so if we have to define urbanization, it is nothing but a transition of a society from rural to urban. And so along with urbanization comes changes in society, economy, as well as politics. And so when we talk about massive urbanization, the kind of urbanization we observe in India, especially in Delhi, NCR, Mumbai, Bangalore, it is a result of three main factors. First is the natural increase of population, which is a function of the fertility rate. So basically, when you have more births than deaths in an urban area, it results in increase in population of that city. Then as the economy develops, more and more number of people migrate to cities for better job opportunities, better education and various other factors. And so you have high rate of rural to urban migration. But apart from that, you have people migrating from smaller or suburban areas or tier 2 and 3 cities to mega urban towns. And so the massive urbanization is a result mainly of these three factors. And so what we have in urban area is high level of accumulation as well as concentration of economic activities. Most industries are located in and around megacities. Most headquarters of large companies as well as government offices are located in urban areas. And so what it does is that you need people to travel from location A, which is their home, to location B, which is their workplace, in order to be able to provide goods and services. And this is what creates congestion in cities. Because your demand for transport system, especially the demand for automobile, outstrips the supply of public infrastructure. And then you create problems with parking and you create traffic jams, which results in very long commute times. So most people listening to this DNS, if they live in mega cities, they understand that for an office time stretching from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., most people in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore have to leave at least 1.5 hours before, and they reach their homes at least 1 to 2 hours after their office time. And so the longer commute times results in a lot of socioeconomic problems. The first problem is isolation. When you spend 8 to 9 hours in your office and 2 to 3 hours in commute, you are left with very much time to spend with your family and your society, and so it results in isolation, which impacts the mental health. Then spending so much time in commuting has a direct bearing on the efficiency of the work of employees. So it directly impacts the productivity of the economy. Longer commuting time also means less time left to spend on the health, especially related to exercises and physical and mental wellness. And so it results in lifestyle diseases like obesity, high blood pressure, as well as diabetes. Then increasing automobile traffic has had a very bad impact on the sense of public space as well, because we know that most roads are publicly owned and free of access. Now, increased traffic has adverse impact on public activities which once crowded the streets, such as markets, processions, games, and community interactions. And these have gradually disappeared to be replaced by automobiles. And these activities have shifted themselves to shopping malls. Then, of course, higher automobile traffic obviously has very negative environmental impacts. Pollution, including noise generated by circulation, has become a major roadblock to the quality life and even the health of urban population. And then, of course, higher automobile traffic on road results in higher fuel demand, and so it compromises our energy security as well, because mostly we are dependent on imports as far as our fuel demand is concerned. And so in this regard, it is important for us to understand what are the major causes of such a massive automobile traffic in our urban areas. The first and the foremost cause is unaffordable housing in core areas of cities, because our city do not follow the integrated land use system. And so what we have is the areas which are totally business oriented, and then you have areas for residential purposes. And so there is always a distance to be traveled from work to the home. And if someone wants to reside in areas near to the offices, they are prohibitively expensive. And so people are spending an increasing amount of time commuting between their residence and workplace. An important factor behind this, of course, is residential affordability, as housing located further away from the central areas are more affordable. And to give you a simple example, it is very expensive to live in Delhi as compared to in Noida. And so therefore, commuters are exchanging commuting time for house affordability. And that is also leading to the expansion of cities into rural areas. It is creating massive satellite towns or suburban areas in the vicinity of major cities. And so it is resulting into commute ranging up to the distance of 30 to even 40 kilometers normally. Since we do not have efficient public transport, this increasingly larger distance is being traveled on cars. And we'll understand the reason behind the inadequacy of public transport. And the question arises that when major cities, so many public transport options exist. For example, most cities now have metros. They have public buses. Many cities also have local transport in the form of railways, like local trains. And so why are not people resorting to public transport? And the simple reason is that whenever you go to a public transport, there is more often than not a state of underutilization and a state of overutilization. And hardly you will find metro with optimal people inside it. For example, the number of seats and the number of people traveling in them should be equal. Normally, it doesn't happen. What happens is that there is a time, especially during the office hours, where the demand for the transport increases and there is a peak. And so our public transports are not designed to cater to the peak demand. And then there are troughs where the public transport is underutilized. So the problem with the urban cities is that when they travel together. And so the public transport is unable to cater to the peak demand of the cities. Since most of the people right now are resorting to suburban areas, and the public transport is quite inadequate in these suburban or satellite towns. And then the problem is that you cannot extend these massive public infrastructural projects to many areas because they are vast, they are organized, and the population density is very low in these suburban areas. And so even if you extend, for example, let's say Delhi Metro to a lot of branches in Gurgaon and Noida, it is not going to yield the kind of return it is yielding in Delhi area. Because these public transit systems will not be able to generate sufficient income to cover its operating and capital costs. So the people are resorting to cars and bikes, as reflected in higher automobile sales, especially during the pandemic time where most of the people wanted to ensure the social distancing. But why is that? Of course, we understand that inadequacy of public transport has resulted in higher automobile sales, but there must be some other reasons as well. What are the factors responsible for people owning more and more cars? And of course, if you have a car and if you have the key to the car as well, it ensures on-demand mobility. If you want to go out at 2 a.m. in the morning, you have that facility. So that is one. Second is, of course, it has higher level of comfort and convenience as compared to the public transport. Because most of the public transport in India do not have the last mile connectivity. For example, ultimately you will have to take an auto or an e-rickshaw from the metro station to your home. And so, higher level of comfort and convenience is one of the important factors. Then, in India, car is still a symbol of societal status. Owning a car, and that too a good car, ensures a better social mobility from middle class to upper middle class, or maybe from lower class to the middle class. And that has a very important significance in Indian society. Then in the past 2 decades, India's urban class has seen a rise in income. And also, there have been access to easy credit, which did not exist earlier. And so both of these factors together means more and more car sales. And then finally, in order to provide and promote more and more employment creation as well as economic growth, even the government of India and many other governments of developing countries are promoting automotive or automobile sector. If you look at the focus sectors of Make in India, automobile is right there. And so the government is providing a lot of incentives and various other facilities for the companies from across the globe to set up their plants in India. And so this has resulted in cheaper cars as well. And so all these factors together combined have led to higher automobile sales. And so we can summarize that the 3 major causes of high congestion in urban areas is unaffordable housing near to the working place, inadequate public transport, and higher automobile sales. And now, since all of you are civil service aspirants, you are not expected to limit yourself to the causes of the problems, but suggest solutions. And so what are the solutions for these massive congestion in urban areas? And so the first and foremost solution is that whenever a city is planned in terms of its land use, the planning for the transport should be integrated with it. But normally what happens is that once you have a city, it starts to grow, and as it grows, the transport system is a consequence of the growth of the city, not the cause of the growth of the city. So there needs to be an integration of transport planning with the land use planning. So when a newer area is planned for the habitation of human population, the transport system, including the public transport system, should be planned and implemented before people start to reside in that area. But the problem is that transport planning has not received the extent of attention it should have in drawing up development and land use planning. And we know that each city in India is different from other in terms of population, area, the kind of urban form it takes, the local topography and income levels. And so, whenever the land use planning is done, these things are taken into account. And similarly, when the transport planning is done, these factors should be accounted for. Then comes a very, very important matter of equitable allocation of road space. And this has to deal with the mentality with which the roads are constructed. And to understand that, let us take an example. At present, road space gets allocated to whichever vehicle occupies it first. And so the focus is on the vehicles and not on people. So the result is that a bus carrying 40 people is allocated only 2.5 times the road space that is allocated to a car carrying only 1 or maybe 2 persons. In this process, the lower income groups have effectively ended up paying in terms of higher travel time and higher travel costs for the disproportionate space allocated to the personal vehicles. And not just that, users of non-motorized modes, for example bicycle riders or pedestrians, have tended to be squeezed out of the roads on account of serious threat to their own safety. And so the allocation of road space should be such that it is equitable, prioritizing the public transport as well as non-motorized modes of transport. After the equitable allocation comes the matter of greater use of public transport. greater use of modes of public transport, for example, metros, local trains, public buses. But the question is how to do that. So first, government needs to prioritize the use of public transport by ensuring the better quality and effective pricing of means of public transport. Now the problem here is that these two words induce trade-offs in themselves. For example, if you want to provide better quality, you cannot keep the pricing very low. And if you keep the pricing low, that means loss to the government. And so that is why you need novel technologies. Novel technologies to ensure high capacity, but at the same time also ensuring the low prices. Then comes integrated public transport system, which basically involves the combination of different modes of transport to maximize ease and efficiency for the user in terms of time, cost, safety, accessibility as well as convenience. And to give you an example as to why integrated public transport system is needed, most urban cities which have metro systems, let's say from point A to B, also have public bus transport system catering to almost the same route, or if not the same, to the parallel route. Now, the problem is that from traveling point A to B, you have both metro as well as buses. But after you exit the metro at B, you have to rely upon local transport system, for example, Ola, Uber, Auto and Rickshaw to get to the destination. And so what integrated public transport system would ensure that the main delivery for long distance within the city would be done by railways as well as metros, and then the buses would cater to the local commute less than, let's say, 3 to 5 kilometers. So they are expected to act in a complementary manner and not catering to the overlapping areas. Also, there is a problem that the road transport is often not connected to the metro transport, although it is being ensured in various cities. And then comes the matter of financing. After all, these mega infrastructure projects required a very, very high cost. And so often the state governments are not in a capacity to bear the burden of this increased cost, especially given the fact that public transport systems are often financially unviable. And so there is a need for Government of India to focus on the integrated public transport systems in cities which have population greater than 1 million. And then finally, there is a need to prioritize the non-motorized transport. And we know that with increasing urban sprawl and rising income levels, non-motorized transport has lost its earlier importance. Statistics show that the share of bicycle trips out of the total trips in Delhi has declined from 17% in 1980s to just 7% in 1995 and further down to 2 to 3% now. We know that non-motorized modes are environment friendly and also result in better health for the traveler. And so the safety concerns of pedestrians and cyclists have to be addressed by encouraging the construction of segregated right-of-way for bicycles and pedestrians. That is the least we can do to start with. Now at the same time, we know that there are a lot of schemes and policies being implemented by the central government as far as urban transport and its infrastructure is concerned. Now it is your job to find out those important schemes and let us know in the comment sections with regard to their most important features. Sale of illegal HTBT cotton seed doubles appears on page number 9. And so the illegal cultivation of herbicide tolerant HTBT cotton has seen a huge jump this year, with seed manufacturers claiming that the sale of illegal seed packets has more than doubled from 30 lakh last year to 75 lakh this year. Now this is a very, very important topic for science and technology section in prelims examination. Just look at this instance in 2012 prelims examination where UPSC had asked what are the reasons for the people's resistance to the introduction of BT brinjal in India. Statement 1. BT brinjal has been created by inserting a gene from a soil fungus into its genome, which is absolutely incorrect because BT brinjal has been created by inserting a gene from a bacteria and not a soil fungus. And so statement 1 is incorrect. And so let us just see whether we can solve this question just by this information. And so of course we cannot arrive at the right answer as of now, but we can eliminate A and D. And so which means that 3 is obviously correct and we have to figure out whether 2 and 4 are correct or not. Let's read the second statement. The seeds of BT brinjal are terminator seeds, and therefore the farmers have to buy the seeds before every season from the seed companies, which is also incorrect. Then we know statement 3 is obviously correct because it appears in both B and C. There is an apprehension that the consumption of BT brinjal may have an adverse impact on health, which is true, and this was one of the first genetically modified edible crop, and so that is why there was a lot of apprehension. And statement 4 is also correct because there is some concern that the introduction of BT brinjal may have adverse impact on biodiversity, which is the common concern behind all the BT crops. And so the right answer was C. But what you should note over here is that the transgenic crops or genetically modified organisms are an important part of the syllabus. And so let us now discuss this from the perspective of prelims examination. So we have seen how illegal cultivation of herbicide tolerant or a crop which is not impacted because of herbicide, and so it is much beneficial trait to be possessed by a crop, because more often than not herbicides along with the weed end up destroying the main crop as well. And so it has seen a huge jump. We have seen the data. And so industry lobbies have written to Agriculture Ministry demanding that the action be taken to stop such sales and punish offenders, noting that the cultivation of genetically modified cotton variant has serious environmental and economic consequences. And so before HTBT cotton came the BT cotton, which is an insect-resistant transgenic crop designed to combat the bollworm. It has been genetically modified to produce an insecticide to combat the cotton bollworm, a common pest. It was created by genetically altering the cotton genome to express a microbial protein from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis. So you have a genome of cotton. What you do is that you remove a part of that genome and insert a genome taken from a bacteria. Now what this new genome does is that it leads to secretion of a protein which is quite toxic to bollworms, which are main threats to cotton in India. And so the transgene inserted into plant's genome produces toxin crystals that the plant would not normally produce, which when ingested by certain population of organisms dissolves the gut lining, leading to organisms' death. And that is why BT cotton has led to increase in production wherever it has been used. And so BT cotton is the only transgenic crop that has been approved by Center for Commercial Cultivation in India. And so that is why when HTBT is being sold to market, it is illegal because it has not been approved by the central government. And so what is this HTBT cotton? So HTBT cotton variant add another layer of modification, making the plant resistant to herbicide glyphosate, but has not been approved by regulators. Fears include glyphosate having a carcinogenic effect, as well as the unchecked spread of herbicide resistance to nearby plants through pollination, creating a variety of superweeds. So when we grow a plant in an area, along with the plants, grow few unwanted plants as well, which are called weeds. And it becomes quite a tricky job, especially in Kharif season, to remove these weeds. And these weeds are problematic because they eat up the common resource. Now we want to remove the weed. And so for that, we use herbicides or the chemicals which kill all the plants. But if we use herbicide, we will end up killing our cotton as well. And so for this very purpose, the companies have come up with a plant which is resistant or which will not be impacted due to herbicide use. And so once you put herbicide in this particular region, all the black dots will disappear, but greens will remain intact, which is what we want. And so HTBT cotton has not been approved by government for cultivation. And so the activists from Shetkari Sangathan have stepped up the reach of their civil disobedience movement to demand the legalization of HTBT cotton by encouraging farmers to plant the seeds in violation of government regulations. Seed manufacturers have said that the illegal seeds are sold using the brand name of prominent companies. So farmers are at risk with such illegal cotton seed sale, as there is no accountability of the quality of the seed. It pollutes the environment. The industry is losing legitimate seed sale, and the government also loses revenue in terms of tax collection. Will only decimate small cotton seed companies, but also threatens the entire legal cotton seed market. Center has made the policy to ban this variant. Center has given advisories to all cotton growing states, for example Maharashtra, Gujarat and Telangana, to seize all the stocks of HTBT and take punitive action against the culprits. This last article for discussion appears on page number 6. In India, looking beyond the binary to a spectrum. And so last month, when the cases surrounding the question of same-sex marriage came up before High Court of Delhi, the Union government was found to be dithering or hesitant because the Solicitor General of India made himself available only to the request of the court to have the matter adjourned on the ground that it was not urgent. And so in this regard, the author cites various international examples from Australia, from South Africa, and various other important judgments of United States which have paved the way for same-sex marriage recognition in these countries. And he says that if you look into various judgments related to the personal laws of various religions, you will find that there is some scope of recognition of these marriages in India itself. Now in this regard, Mangal sir has already had this discussion on 26th of February 2021, where he had discussed various Supreme Court judgments which have laid the foundation for same-sex marriage, although so far it is not recognized. So, starting with Constitution Bench judgment under Puttaswamy case, which declared the right to privacy as the fundamental right protected under Indian Constitution, then Navate Jauhar judgment, which talked about family, marriage, procreation and sexual orientation are all integral to the dignity of the individual. Hadia judgment, which talked about intimacies of marriage lie within a core zone of privacy, and recent Supreme Court judgment on intercaste and interfaith marriages have reasserted the same facts. Matters of dress and food, of ideas and ideologies, of love and partnership are within the central aspects of identity. Society has no role to play in determining our choices of partners. The Constitution protects personal liberty from disapproving audiences. The social values and morals have their space, but they are not above the constitutionally guaranteed freedom. And finally, under Sabrimala judgment, Supreme Court stated individual freedom prevails over purported group rights. So you can clearly see that all these judgments reinstate the same fact. Choice of partner is a personal choice over which others don't and can't interfere. As and when these cases progress in Supreme Court, we will take them up in a wider discussion. Let us now move on to the question of the day.